duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Aho, Ashe.
Ashe.
It's time to recognize the radical among us. Radicals represent reforms and change for the people, by the people. They hold strong convictions close and advocate for fundamental transformation with direct action, often putting their minds, bodies, and spirits on the line for true justice. This is RAD AF, a podcast that amplifies the stories of our Long Beach area radical change makers. This year, we talk to radical women, the community organizers, grassroots movement builders, and leaders who give a fuck about mobilizing people power to make positive change in the community. The revolution might not be televised, but you sure can find a way to join it online or in person in a neighborhood near you. Let's go.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Diana Martinez.
And I'm Melissa Morgan.
And today we have two amazing organizers with us from Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition. We have Gaby Hernandez, who is the Executive Director, and Jamilet Ochoa, who is a community organizer.
We're super happy to have you both here today. Tell us, who are you? And can you share with us your gender pronouns and your gender identity?
My name is Gaby Hernandez. Like Diana mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition. I go by pronouns she, her, ella, and I identify as a woman.
Yeah, my name is Jamilet, and I'm also with the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition as a community organizer. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as a woman, and I also identify as queer.
Amazing, thank you. So tell us, if you were to describe each other in 3 words, what would they be?
So we prepped for this. We were like, what would we say to each other? So I can get started. I would describe Jamilet as a compassionate person. For sure, an organizer, and anything she does, she's always bringing the organizing mind. And then she's fierce. Of course, she got to be fierce being with our team. And so that's how I would describe her in 3 words. There's many more adjectives that I would say about her, but I'll stick to 3.
Thank you, Gaby. I know for sure what Gaby is visionary. I've known that with working with her, she makes these connections, and I'm like, whoa, like, I didn't see that, but then I see it, and that's how we come in a lot of times with, like, alignment in the work that we do. Also bold. I feel like there has to be a word that shows the power that, like, the team brings. Kind of like empowerment that we build with community as well, one another. And then detail oriented. That's something that is really respectful, or I respect a lot, because I know it catches a lot of things when we're advocating, when we're meeting with people that have power, right? And not in a good way, like power in a way to, like, oppress people, right? Like, she catches things that are just, like, may not be clear or may need to be explored a little bit more. And then we learn that their intentions were in the wrong place, right? So I feel like, to me, detail-oriented is really, really there.
Very cool. So I'm curious, at LBIRC, are you all staffed with women? Only women?
Yes, we're all women. We actually have one of our organizers coming in. Our organizing manager is a man, so he's gonna have a lot to deal with, but also, like, a lot of powerful women, you know. And that was one of the things that we asked him in the interview. I was like, this is a team of women, how do you feel about that? He's like, I'm ready, I'm self-aware, I'm conscious, I got this. So I'm excited to bring in, you know, a community organizer who has a lot of history and movement work in California, specifically Southern California, but also a man that is going to be in addition to our all-women staff team.
Okay, very cool. So it sounds like your team has been women-powered. What do you feel like is something that all women have in common? Is there a common link?
For me, the biggest thing is that I think all have in common is intuition. I feel like intuition, or like even intuition connected to the way things feel in your body, are so powerful. I know oftentimes as women, like, our emotions are antagonized, are like real responses to, like, real time, like, harm that's happening to us and our bodies, it's often antagonized, right? And so I think for me, like, women having intuition, trusting their intuition, listening to their intuition is something that we all have. And oftentimes, because it's antagonized, we sometimes don't listen to it, right? So intuition to me is, like, big. Yeah.
For me, I think I would have to say women hold a lot. I grew up in a household where it was all women, very strong-willed women. And I saw my grandmother and my mom hold a lot. And I think we see that in organizing too, where we have to hold a lot of different things, complex things at the same time. And we have to wear a lot of different hats. So I would say that for the most part, especially for women of color, I would specifically just put this as women of color. Like, we hold a lot in our societies and our communities and our families. I've witnessed that. Now I'm in that position where I have to hold a lot. And it's quite a bit. I don't know how we do it, but we do it.
Can you then tell me a memory when you realized, you were powerful?
I grew up in Mexico. I lived there until I was about 12 years old. So the 90s, I was in Mexico. But I got to come here in 98 to the U.S. And my family was in Oceanside. So I got to be, in the neighborhood in Oceanside. And we would play around, with my friends and my cousins. I didn't speak one word of English, okay, mind you. Everyone in the neighborhood spoke English. Some of them spoke Spanish, but very little, and I remember being like, okay, wait a second, like, I don't speak English, but what's happening here is not sitting well with me. Whatever it was. And I can't even remember exactly what was happening. I just remember my uncle being, you're such a, revolutionary. Those were his words. And I'm like, but I'm just, trying to make sense of this. And whatever's happening here is not sitting well with me. And I just want to say something about it. And they're like, eres como la comandante Ramona. And if you know who she is, she's like a badass revolutionary, really. Zapatista woman from the 80s and 90s that fought for the liberation of Zapatistas. And so I'm honored now to have been called that. Back then I didn't even know, right, what it was. But I think for me is when I realized, I'm a girl and I'm a powerful girl, I think I see it now more, fast forward 20 something years. But in that moment, I feel like my relatives saw that, my uncle saw that. And now I'm like, they saw that. I recognize the power that I hold by just calling things out, even if I didn't speak the language. I was just like, this doesn't sit well, and I got to say something. They probably saw it in terms of revolutionary, you're causing problems, but it wasn't that, I was just trying to make some sense of whatever was happening. So I love
that you took that and really ran with it in the best way. You took that and maybe they didn't mean it as a good thing, right? They said you're causing trouble, you're speaking up, you're doing all this stuff, it's uncomfortable or whatever it was. And you took it and you made it yours. So I love that.
So I know I was also raised in Mexico. I was not born in Mexico, but I was raised in Mexico for a majority of my childhood, up until third grade. I consider majority of my childhood. I remember when I first got here, it felt different, uncomfortable. I didn't know the language either. I was learning English as well. But I remember that I was kind of searching for a home of where I can feel empowered, where I can feel this is my element. So when I have two younger brothers, one younger by 2 years and the other one is 16. And so I remember being young, just being really curious, as I'm queer and also really femme, how to find empowerment through that. For example, when I was, I think I was in 6th or 7th grade, I joined boxing and I was like, well, I'm going to do this. This is going to be my thing. And I think I did it for 2-3 years, but it was so cool because I remember showing up with a pink bag, super fan, but there would only be guys in the boxing gym. And I was like, all right, let's spar, let's do this, and doing it, right? Actually doing it. So I think to me, my coming to feeling empowered is tied to my femininity and as a queer femme, right? When I was growing up and knowing that I'm queer, I did think about what does it mean to be queer? What am I supposed to look like, right? Because oftentimes we think queer is associated with not femininity and something else, right? And not that there's one way to depict it, right? There's never a way to depict it. So you can't assume queerness just based on how people look. To me, finding queerness, finding power through my queerness, and using my femininity to really as my strength and my shield has been what has helped me know that I am a powerful woman. I know there's been times where uncles would actually say really homophobic comments and jokes. Even me being queer, already knowing it, just being queer. they'd point at my brothers and say, "Oh, are you queer?" Or like make jokes about my brothers. And that's when I step in. Is like, what if I'm queer? Would that be a joke? Do you think that's funny? And they'd all stop laughing, right? So men would talk about queerness to antagonize it, right, on men, like young men. But when a woman stepped in her femininity, it was like, what if I was queer? The joke would end. So to me, those were moments that really showed like my power and like as a woman, right, with carrying different identities and knowing that I've entered a world that is different was a big like stepping moment for me.
What I hear you both saying is one of the commonalities for us as women is our strength and our power. And I'm remembering as a child, as a girl, the gender roles in my family growing up and how badly I wanted to take shop class. I wanted to be able to learn how to freaking use the saws and cut wood and crap and build things and learn how to fix cars. And so there was a day I like took the lawnmower when my parents were gone and I spent like 5 hours trying to figure out how to make this thing cut the grass. It was a push mower. It was a disaster, but it looked good by the end. And I signed up for driver's ed because I was like, I'm going to take like the power in my hands and kind of prove to others that I can do just the same things as boys and my brothers. And I think about what you're saying about the idea, the stereotypes and the feelings around our gender identity, our sexual orientation, and that oftentimes like homophobia comes from men not being comfortable with our fluidity in our gender roles and in our identities and like that fear. And for us, we're like, we're women, hear us roar, you know, we are powerful women. And at a very young age, we recognize that often. Fortunately, we can find those moments. And it makes me think about organizing. So here you are in an organization that's probably pretty heavily dominated by women. I know at Long Beach Forward, we're a majority women team, but we have some diversity in the gender realm here. When you think about organizing and finding those moments, when you found those moments in your life that led you here, I'm curious, how do you define organizing for those who may not really know the term? And then what was your path to organizing?
Good question. I think for me, organizing means building power together towards a common goal. There's tons of issues, right, that like we work on, but I think organizing is coming together and building power for a common goal. And I think for me, what brought me here is my lived experience, you know, growing up as an undocumented young person and then now being an adult and still being undocumented has really taught me the real need for demanding what we know inherently we deserve, which is having, you know, a life full of dignity and opportunities to thrive. And so I think knowing that things didn't come easy to me and like really learning about this early on in my, you know, in my years, knowing that like, actually, yeah, that principal is going to continue to, you know, bully me for not having my shirt tucked in, right? Because of the way that I look, because of where I come from, right? And so I remember feeling like there's something that needs to happen. Like this isn't right. I just didn't know what could have been done, you know, in that moment. And now that I see it, I was like, we could have organized all my friends, right? But like, you cannot just bully me or tell me that I need to do something and you're not telling that to anyone else, right? So that's the power of like organizing, and we can do that at any stage of our lives. I think my lived experience really drove me to like do this work and continues to drive me because I really truly believe that we can build a better world together. And we're not going to do that alone. I'm not going to do that just Gaby doing it by herself. It needs to be a whole movement and a collective of people that fights for this, right? And that we build the solidarity to fight for one another, because I think we have sometimes more struggles in common than we think. And building that is essential to really win. And when I say win, is we win for all oppressed folks.
Well, I mean, there's not many ways to define organizing, right? I think what you said, Gaby, is so on point. I think one thing I can add is that organizing just really centers doing it with community, right? Like in collective. And it also comes from a place of love, comes from a place of like desire to heal. And I also think of like Esteban Munoz, like queerness in the horizon, like when you're organizing, you're like, you have a foot on the ground, but you also have a foot towards the horizon of what could be of a healthier, like more loving world. I know like organizers, I definitely think they have to be visionaries. They have to have imagination. And we all do have that. I really do think that organizers are often depicted as like people that work for nonprofits only, right? People that work in organizing, like that is their actual pay, right? But there's a lot of organizers in our families, like our mothers, like our grandmothers, right? I think of the times where, you know, we organize in our homes or against patriarchy, right? And that happens through conversations, through like 2-hour conversations, intense ones with your mom, like going back and forth on like why I don't think you should be serving my dad dinner because he's a grown man, right? Like these things are organizing, right? Because we identify and we are our mothers, like, I want to say like we are our mother, and I mean, I think I am my mother's like fire, you know, like sometimes I know for my mom, like she really comes to responding from things from like kindness and a smile. I know for me, I'm like, I'm angry, and when I tell my mom I'm angry, she's like like smiling so big and laughing. She's like, yeah, like I'm gonna do that too, you know, like I'm gonna join you on this anger, right? Like, so I think for me is like organizing is really everywhere. Organizing is working together, and oftentimes it's like just a journey for healing, like really wanting to heal, really wanting to see a better world.
Wow. Thank you for these definitions from y'all, because I am fairly new to the organizing world and I've never considered myself an organizer, but after what I just heard, I'm like, maybe I am. Maybe we are organizers. I always felt like I'm, you know, I work closely with organizers. I assist the organizers. But this is amazing, a really good definition, and I kind of like put things into different perspective for me. Just looking back at like everything growing up, I guess. So then, could you share with us, what was one of the biggest lessons you learned on your journey to coming to work at your organization, and how did it impact your work?
Yeah, I definitely feel like as I'm becoming what I considered a seasoned organizer, because I mean I've been here for 3 years and I've been organizing for 3 years, but I've done that before. Like I've done that in my, like as a child, right? I've done that as a like student, like activist, which is a little different, but like still did require some organizing skills. I think for me, the biggest lessons is like we're all humans with limits, right? I know working with community and for community and alongside community, right? Like we also are in response to the harm that's being done to our communities. And I would love, like, sometimes I feel like, yeah, like I can do this. Like I can keep on like fighting with the systems, or like, you know, calling this person that just treated this other person bad, right? And so then basically is just realizing that we're humans, and at the end of the day, right, like we all have personal boundaries and personal like emotional traumas that we carry as we do this work. That has been the biggest thing. Like for me, I need to know what my triggers are before I talk to someone. For me, I need to like really know myself as I'm getting to know other people, right? Because if I am an organizer, right, that wants to do things ethically, and that I'm not triggering other people with my trauma, because we're triggering each other at this point, like I have to know, what do I need to self-soothe? What do I need to make sure that I do this for the long run? A lot of organizers burn out, right? And so I think for me is like, what are the systems that I have for myself that work for myself so that I can better serve the communities that I work with? That has been the biggest lesson, and I feel like that's why I'm so vocal about like therapy, self-care, like doing what I need to do to feel better, because oftentimes our work gets glamorized when it's like, when it is like a self-sacrifice, when it is like self-burnout, right? So my biggest lesson is like, let's continue to also want healing for ourselves as we want healing for other people, right? It's a reciprocal thing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think for me, what I will also say, one of the biggest lessons has been that the communities that we work with are experts, you know, and I think sometimes, especially if you're wearing your nonprofit hat, you think like, oh, I'm going to solve people's problems and I'm going to fix it all. that's just not realistic and not real. Like, our folks have been like, figuring out ways of surviving and making things work for a long, long time, and so we learn so much from community, and community has shaped a lot of the work that we do and that we have done, because we consider them experts of their own life, and we learn from them. So I think that's one of big lesson that I have taken from this work, is that community is powerful, and they are experts of their own lived experience, and they have done this for a long time. We're just a part of the puzzle, Another thing that I would say is there's a lot of unlearning and learning that happens on a daily basis, right? And that is about practices or norms that you thought are appropriate, right? Or also things that you have normalized that are probably not good, right? So there's a lot of unlearning and learning that happens, and like being patient with yourself and through that process, right? Like having patience for yourself and for those around you, that like everyone is going through it, and everyone has a lot going on, and this work is heavy, right? Especially if you're impacted by this, or if you get, like Jamilet mentioned, triggered by some of the things that we deal with, right? Because it's not necessarily an outside thing. Like, some of the things are happening in our own homes, right? And so we have to kind of hold that. Talking about going back to holding so much, like, we have to hold a lot of complexities. And so I think a big lesson too is just being patient and not expecting perfection from yourself or from anyone else, because it's not realistic, and it's actually very white supremacist to think that, right? That there is this perfection from folks, and especially doing this work, sometimes the demand of the need it's really great, and we feel like, well, we have access to certain things or resources, like we should be able to do it all, but that's not real. Like, we cannot do it all, right? But we do try our best, and I think part of that is being patient with yourself and others.
Oh, you make me think about that idea of a woman that we're supposed to be super women. Like, it's kind of inherent, I think, at least in our North American experience as women, that we're caretakers, and probably across the globe, really, we're caretakers of society. So there's an embedded pressure, an assumption that we're going to do that. And I'm thinking about, it was last week, Jamilet, when we were with some community folks in our local Long Beach Equity and Human Relations Commission meeting, giving public comment about all the research that you've really spearheaded around surveillance technology with the police department, how dangerous it is for communities. And about 6 of us shared some demands and some perspective to get the commission, who ended up supporting your demands, to get them on board, and realizing that some of the systems in place with our police department are racist, they're dangerous, they're violent, they're murderous, I say. And I was just thinking that as soon as I'd made my comment, it was virtual, and we called in. I was sitting next to my daughter, and I was in my mothering role, wearing the mother hat, but finishing the work, the call to action. And I was just so exhausted after sharing my comment, because I talked about myself as a mother, a caretaker, and my concerns about safety for Black and brown kids as a parent of this future generation. And I just want to tie this to that idea of trying to be super women, caring for our community, following our intuition, even as young girls. I was exhausted. I was shaking. I had to hurry up and hang up as soon as I was done, because I was so drained. And you both just talked about how, we have to have some boundaries. This work is heavy. Often this work impacts us day to day. So I'm wondering about some specific examples of, how do you all take care of yourselves? We're in a COVID pandemic. We know how these days and times have impacted our communities, people in our own families. Like, what's one thing that you've done each that have helped you to keep pushing through and pulling community in?
I can share. There's many things, and I feel like different things work for the kind of feeling I'm carrying. So for the public comment sessions, after those days, my body feels heavy. I definitely just want to rest. I want to drink tea to soothe my throat, right? So when I feel stress or a lot of tension, I feel it in my throat. So also that, right? Being self-aware of our bodies, going back to the conversation with intuition and our bodies and listening to our bodies, that's something I've been practicing. Where do I feel my stress? Where do I need to take care of in my body? Is it my head? Is it my throat? Is it my legs? Is it my whole body right now, right? And so to me, it just depends what my body's asking me. But in the days where I just have a lot of anxiety because there's an event coming, I just saw something that dropped in like the city council agenda, right? And there's not capacity to like say something about it, right? For me, what helps me is going running. Like, I go running and I connect to my heartbeat and I have control over my heartbeat because I'm pushing myself with how fast I'm running, and I slow down and I'm taking care of my body. Like, I'm connecting to it again. So to me, it's been a lot of like physical connection, but also like taking it back to like the emotional. And I go to therapy. Like, I love talking about it. Like, yeah, I'm gonna go to therapy. Have a great day, everyone, because I think it's like, oftentimes we don't really bring up that that's part of organizing, is taking care of yourself. Part of doing this work is taking care of yourself. I think if you're doing it in a way that's sustainable, you should be taking care of yourself, right? And if we know of like colleagues, right, that are not doing that practice, we should normalize like, hey, like, are you okay? Like, what's going on, just because it's easy to get lost in the sauce. It's easy to go deep into like surveillance work, it happens to me all the time, but just listening to your body and what it needs.
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of something that my therapist said: you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Which is really real. And I think going back to what Jamilet's mentioning, and actually just like bringing that moment back of like, we are humans, right? Like, the things that we do impact us. Like, city council or city officials may think like, oh, these people are being reactive or dramatic. No, these are like, this is impacting us because we know the realities of the harmful things that come out from those things, right? So I just want to bring that like really real into this room, that the things that happen do impact us, right? In a very real way, that it has like a physical impact in our bodies. And so I think for me, what I've done is being self-aware for sure about, the same thing, like, where do I feel it and what I need to do to soothe myself. But I think as of recently, I was very lucky to participate in a retreat, in a 1-week retreat that is meant for organizers that are, stressing, right? They're really overwhelmed. And so I was really privileged in being part of this cohort in the spring, and I got to be in Mississippi, and I got to be away for a whole week and just connect to nature and be present, and like lean into spaciousness, right? Without having to be so overwhelmed by this capitalist society that demands so much of us, right? That we have internalized so much. And I think that's a practice that I want to continue on every year. Like, I think it was really eye-opening for me to disconnect, right? And to like be with myself, right? Just with myself, and ask myself really tough questions, and come up with, from those questions with more clarity about, my purpose and how I do things and why I do things. And so that's a practice that I want to continue on. I encourage everyone to check out the Wind Call Institute. The applications just closed, but they're always on a rolling basis. And I think it's a very real thing to like witness, to like be in space with yourself. And I don't think we practice that enough. Going back to holding so much, right? Like, Melissa, you're talking about being a mom and then doing, being there and doing public comment. Like, when do you get to be with Melissa, right? And when do you get to ask Melissa those tough questions that are needed to sustain yourself and your purpose, right? And so that was a transformative experience for me, and I want to continue to do that on a yearly basis. Like, get away really for a week and disconnect fully from everything and be with Gaby, right? And be with myself and ask myself those questions that are needed to sustain me in this work, but just in life in general, right? Like, this work is heavy, but also life is it's rough, especially when you have all these intersecting realities that you deal with on a daily basis. So yeah, coaching too. Coaching is an amazing resource, which is really expensive, to be completely honest too. But it's something that I've been, privileged to also, have. And I think it's been transformative to like have someone else that holds you accountable because you want them to hold you accountable. So yeah, a number of different things, but those are the examples that I'll say for now.
Can I just share that I love that you brought up like capitalism and like the demands of us, right? Because I feel like, for example, when we described ourselves with like bold fears, like we make organizers sound like badasses, and we are, but also like we're also human, right? And so bold, right? So bold and fierce can also be tied to resting, right? Like can also be tied to like feeling sadness because of this system that's in place that's hurting us and killing us, right? Like that is also bold and fierce. I feel like oftentimes for example, like organizing is like badass. Like I'm just trying to emphasize like it can be so many more things than what you see on Instagram, than what you see like those Snapchat images of like just perfection, right? Like of what an organizer should look like in an action photo, right? But there's so much behind that. There's so much stories behind that. And oftentimes with her, like the root of it is often her, right? Often, not always. There's a lot of happiness. Yeah.
You ever heard of the nap ministry? You ever seen them on Instagram? Yeah. It's all about radical self-care, taking naps, how that's a radical act against white supremacy and consumerism and capitalism. It was such a cool thing. Shout out to the nap ministry. Take a nap. It's napping. Yes. Get a couch in your office. We have 2 of them.
Okay, so you guys shared how you take care of yourself, which amazing. I'm really glad you're taking care of yourselves because this work is heavy. But like, how do you stay inspired? Right? Like, how do you come back after that reset? Like, your retreats or you're running, and then you come back and like want to keep doing the work.
Music inspires me a lot. Even though it's not necessarily tied to, everything's tied to political stuff, but even though even if it's like shaking your ass music, like it inspires me, right? Because to me, it just like centers joy. Like if I feel joy, I feel inspired, right? If I feel like I'm working towards something that's gonna have a good outcome, that's inspiring. Or more than anything else, is being in a call with like other like amazing folks. Like when I joined the Equity Human Relations Commission and there was like 6 other people, including Melissa in there, like I left that meeting like on fire. Like there's many things going on, but one of the biggest feelings was inspiration by hearing other people's public comments and their boldness, like their voice, like their sincerity on why they care so much about this issue. That's what inspires me. And the next day I was like, dang, like there needs to be a celebration because the demands that we had are actually being supported. Like we were all like, what? Like, is this real? Is this actually happening? But it happened because community organized. So seeing the results, super inspiring. It's like, people call it like organizers high. Like, yes, that's real. Like, for sure. Yeah, I think the small, big wins, for sure, and victories are what continues to inspire me, but also just community in general. Like, our folks are really dealing with a lot. Like, and have been for a long time, under the systems that operate in this country. And even back home, right, wherever we come from, like there's a lot that has happened. And the U.S. has a lot to do with that too. But we hold, again, a lot. And I think just seeing people, like, knowing that they're interested in programs that are like late at night in the evening after like going to work, being a mom, like wearing all these other hats, like they're still there and like they want to learn. And they want to like be activated and they want to like understand the root causes of things. Like that inspires me, right? We also work with a lot of folks that have been in detention or in the prison system, and seeing them having so much like will to continue to live and inspire others and do like real work that is going to be life changing inspires me. I just met with someone yesterday that I was like, wow, like this person does not give up, and they inspire me so much because of their desire to give back, like so much. When you have so little and you want to give back, it's like so inspiring. And then I think I would also say my family, like they inspire me daily, to continue to do this work, and to be pushing. I know it's needed. So I think there's a number of different things that inspire me, but at the end of the day, it's people and people doing amazing work. The other thing that I'll say is like I read a lot. So, a lot of organizers that I may not know personally, but are doing amazing work and writing about it. We need more of that. I always tell Jamilet and like other folks, like we need to write down the things that we're doing, because if we don't do it, it doesn't,
the history that gets told is something else, right? It's completely different. So I'm loving this podcast because this is not on the record. We're all saying this, right? Like, so this is the way that we like document our stories, right? Our stories of resistance, but our stories of love and our stories of like what inspires us in this work. And this is a mark, you know, that others will listen back to this and be like, well, okay, maybe this will be an inspiration for someone else.
For sure. And do either of you have a woman that has inspired you and your work?
One, that's so hard. But I can. I for sure my mom. My mom has always been so cool and fun. Like, my mom was definitely the cool mom all along, and so I feel like that really shaped me into thinking how parenthood is like, yeah, that's my homie, you know, that's my mom, but she's also held a lot of things and has shown kindness throughout it all. And to me, that was, of course, like, not perfectly, right? Like, there's physical impacts and emotional impacts of holding a lot of things. But I know one thing my mom is like, has always been open to new ideas and seeing the world with new lenses every time. For example, my mom completed our leadership academy, and now she sees the police and she's like, "F y'all," you know, like wants to like actually flip them off. Like, mom, like, okay, do you? But also like, dang, my mom is like more down than I am. And then even with like surveillance technology work, I talked to her about it, and she listens to me, and she's like, "Yeah, like, you're doing badass things, you know, like, I'm proud of you." So for me, my mom also accepting my queerness and not necessarily it being like something out of the ordinary, but more like, yeah, and like, we're cool, you know, like, it's not I've known this, like, you're you, and I know more of you. Also, my grandma, we FaceTime sometimes through like my tia's phone, and the first time I introduced her to my partner, I was nervous. I was like, oh my God, like, how is she going to respond, right? And it was through FaceTime because I didn't see her in person. It was during the pandemic. I told her, I was like, oh, like, this is my partner. And then she's like, hi, mija, like, how are you? Like, you know, very casual conversation. And that to me was so big because it was just like, it's just love, you know? It's understanding, it's love. And to me, it's really inspiring and like beautiful to have these women in my life that are older, right? And that are and will be ancestors that will guide, right? Like, the future generations, which is us, and like generations that may come ahead of us in our lineage, to accept queerness, to know and be witnesses of how this system is violent, right? That we currently have, and supporting their daughters doing that. I know there's times where I do have fear, right? I hold fear in my heart. I'm like, yeah, like, what's gonna happen, right? The closer I step into this direction, like, what could happen, right? Like, so I guess it's like also having that comfort of like a mother come in, like, you're doing the right thing. What you're doing is the right thing. Like, you're protecting your people, you're protecting yourselves, like, you are fighting for a better world, right? And even that is so comforting because I think for me is like, it's not just like, everything's okay, mija. No, it's like, you know, everything's not okay, but we see it together. And that to me brought a huge like bridge. So we now connect both worlds. Like, since she graduated from the Leadership Academy that I facilitate with LBIRC, and we talk about like the prison industrial complex and detention and how, you know, ICE and police collaborate. Community members can also draw those bridges with their children, right? And so that to me is like, all the women that I've had with LBIRC are inspiring too. So yeah, a lot of love.
Yes, I love all of that. It's actually mine is also very similar to Jamilet, but I just want to say that all of us are future ancestors.
Yeah,
all of us, right?
yeah.
So everything that we do really is gonna mean something. But my mom also went through the Leadership Academy, you know?
Yes,
and
bring your mom.
literally, and I think that just tells you how much we believe in our work, right? That even our own, like, relatives and people that we truly honor and we care about are part of this, right? Like, so we do it with that kind of love for everyone. Like, this is like, it is like my mom, it's like my tia, right? Like, we do it with that kind of, so that tells you a lot about LBIRC, you know, and where our work comes from. But my mom also, similarly to Jamilet, like, has accepted so much that hasn't been normal in her upbringing, right? Or in her family dynamics. And she's willing to like be open, you know, and think and be accepting. And I just love that, you know, because she just tells me that it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still learn, right? You're still open. And sometimes she doesn't even see that, right? She's like, no, but I can't change that particular way that I think about that particular thing, right? And I'm like, but think about this. You did that for this. So you are open. You're just choosing, what you're open to. And so you can be open to so many things. I mean, she has been. Things that I've been surprised by, that she's like, yeah, I get it. And it's cool, And so it's just so loving. And she's definitely has made a mark in my life. Even growing up and her standing up to people, not knowing English and being like, you're not going to treat me like that. And I still need my discount and I still need my bill to be fixed, and like me, now I see it that it's like, well, no wonder I am who I am, right? Like this woman didn't care if she didn't speak the language. She was going to find a way to get what she needed, right? And wasn't embarrassed. Like, she's like, this is what I got to do. This is what I got to do and I'm going to do it, So seeing that really inspired me, seeing how, she got up and left everything, back home, literally everything, like her friends, her work, her dreams, everything, she left it behind and came to a country that was not friendly to her, where she didn't speak the language. So that's courage, that's power. And my mom inspires me every day when I think about the sacrifices that she had to make, that I wish she didn't, but she had to, because she was looking at, our survival.
That's awesome. It's really cool to hear about how you see your moms. I think about riding in a car with her. My mom's a white woman. My dad's a black man, so I'm biracial. And one day we were leaving the library as little kids, and she was driving, and on the corner of the library park was the KKK. Wow. In full regalia. I grew up in North Florida, and they were holding American flags, I remember, which was like frightening to me. And the police were there also protecting them due to free speech. And my mom just started yelling the most obscene profanity I'd ever heard in my life. She rolled down the window and was just screaming and shouting. And I always thought of my mom as a very peaceful person. She's very giving, loving, rooted in her faith, all about service and standing up for people and speaking up and putting her heart in action. And that moment always stood out to me, of like her boldness, her, the radical stuff that's inside of her that comes out in a lot of her actions. Very inspiring, such a cool moment to see my mom doing such a brave thing. And then it marked in my mind that there's something there to that, to having that voice as well as to what those folks represented. Tell us a little bit about your mission and vision at LBIRC. I mean, the name says a lot, Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition. Tell us, what is your organization? What's it about? And then how did you all get involved in our people's budget? What is that connection to our work?
In LBIRC, actually, we just went through a strategic planning process 2 years ago now. And so we revised our mission and vision to something that was connected to the work that we're doing on the ground. And so LBIRC is about fighting alongside immigrant folks to fight for bold protections for our communities so that folks like immigrant people, whether they have status or not, have an opportunity to thrive. And so we're doing this not only locally, but we're doing this at the state level and even nationally, right? And so we're big on working with people and for people that are impacted by, very racist systems in this country to fight for what we deserve, which is like a peaceful life, with opportunities to thrive, right? And to have things that we don't have to fight for. Like, we don't have to be in survival, right? Like, and we don't want that for our community. So that's what we're about. And we do that every day. We ground ourselves in our values and our mission and our vision. And it's really tailored to focus on immigrant people and our struggles, but not giving up, right? Empowering one another to fight for what we know we deserve. And for the People's Budget, we were one of the organizations, along with Long Beach Forward, that started this whole thing back in 2018. I was actually in this very room where we're like recording this, where we had our first meeting, and we had like a lot of activities where we're like, okay, what are we gonna do? We know that the city's budget does not reflect the community's needs. So how are we going to make sure that that does happen? And so we came together along with I would say 10 to 15 different organizations in the city. And we're like, okay, let's really talk this through. Let's see where the money is going. And then we quickly realized money was going to the police department, and by millions of dollars. Like, almost 50% of the general budget is going to the police department here in Long Beach. And so we were like, I wouldn't say we were surprised, but by the number, like we were like, whoa, like we're talking about a lot of money that is going to the police department, and we know that that's not where our communities go to feel safe. And so we had a lot of opportunities to strategically think like, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to push for things that our communities deserve? So going back again, right, for us, it was really tied to our mission. Like, this is what we're about. We're fighting for bold protections for immigrant people. And this is also the budget, right? Like, how are we going to fight for things that are going to impact our communities in the long run? So that's how we got engaged back in 2018. I remember our first press conference, outside of city council. We did a lot of activities, and now it's transformed, especially after the uprisings, before we were like, we understood that the city budget did not reflect our values as community and that a lot of money was going to police. But at that time, we were looking at, okay, how do we invest in community, right? And after the uprisings, I think it was a big awakening where we were like, okay, how are we going to take that money from police? Like, because that's where that money needs to come from, like the way that the city thinks about public safety is really not the way that we think about it or that our communities think about it, right? Like, the safest communities are not the ones with more police, right, are the ones with plenty of resources. And so, I think now we're in the journey where we're like, okay, we really want to divest from the police department and invest in our communities because, they're getting tons of, millions of dollars and our communities are not safe, right? Like, and they're using it to buy toys, right? Like, they're using it to buy armored cars, right? Or like drones and like things that are like, that's not going to keep our community safe, right? Like, our communities are scared of it. They're not going to call you, right? And I think that's a big disconnect that they don't understand. Like they think that we're the problem. It's like, no, we're just calling it out. Like we're pointing out the obvious that you somehow don't get to see or you're blindfolded for that. But we're just calling out the obvious. We're not saying we're inventing these numbers and coming up with like facts. That's not what we're doing here. Like, we're just calling out the realities and things that and are simply not not recognizing, but we're not inventing anything. Like, these are just calling out facts, So I'll stop there because I just said a lot, but Jamilet is not, involved in the people's budget as a representative for LBIRC. So she's had a different journey now too, but I'll pass it on.
I guess like LBIRC's role in the budget has been centering like community and plugging in the base that we serve and we work with and work alongside with into the fight for defund. For us, and specifically like within the Leadership Academy, we already have conversations about white supremacy. We already have conversations about capitalism. We have conversations about policing, right? And I heard this like really beautiful quote that just stayed with me forever, and it's like radical es ir a la raíz. So like radical is going to the root. So when you create radical change, you go to the root, right? Like you have to go to the root to really see what's going on at the root. Is the root rotten? Is the root healthy? Is the root like if it's raw, like you need to throw that out. If it's healthy, all right, then it's gonna flourish something beautiful, right? And so when I think of like radical and like radical change, I bring in this idea because internally with the Leadership Academy, our leaders are already learning about the roots of this system, right, that are rotted and informed by white supremacy and capitalism playing a big role by that influence, right, and the way that there's a lot of anti-Blackness even in the communities that we serve and bringing that in, right? Like all this unlearning, all this learning, all this reframing to really center like abolition, to center transformative justice has been happening, obviously not perfectly, right? It's a lot of trial and error and experiments and trying new things on, and learning from each other. Hey, this is not appropriate to say, this is appropriate to say, this is like something we should talk about a little bit more, right? But because we do this work internally, that's why our base and our community members see BOG as an opportunity to see results, right? Where they get to apply how white supremacy functions locally and how the budget is a reflection on where, if you see the root of the budget, it's not rooted on community, right? Like we see community like struggling because of the lack of resources. And so all these connections are already made, and our community is then able to advocate through that lens, right? By being informed that all these systems are in place, and I am here to make a difference and to shift the way these funds are used, because that is what causes structural changes, right? To see investment in our communities. So that's definitely the piece of where community comes in, and I feel like where we get to see some results, some of them being the Justice Fund, some of them being like we were in the past involved with language access, right, which is just being able to listen into the city council meetings, or even being able to pay your bill online through the phone, right, like your water bill, like what am I being charged for? So those are all things, though they're small, right, they're big, right, because they did cause a positive impact in our community so that they can just have the essentials.
I heard you say earlier, I think it was Jamilet, that organizers have to be visionaries and have imagination. And I just wanted to say that's something I really appreciate about both of you and how I've seen you both lead and model in the community here. Because in being visionaries and having imagination, I felt like you've really stood really close by the Black community and lifting up issues that impact your community and the Black community, and taking the time to have sessions in Spanish for people to talk about these issues and how these systems, the system of racism, impacts our communities. And I really just want to appreciate you both and give you flowers, virtual flowers, for centering the Black community in your conversations, because not everybody does that. And I think that's radical. I think it's radical, even in we're at the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd having been murdered, unfortunately, by police. And, people aren't talking so much about Black lives anymore. But you two, your organization, the people you're training up through probably your leadership academy and everything else, you all are continuing to share that message and that value. I appreciate that. And I'm curious, as you've been visionary or had imagination or pushed others to do it, as we start to close, what are some of the wins you all have experienced, whether it's through people's budget or other work that you do in organizing and campaigns? What are some of the wins that you're really happy about and that are going to help to push you forward in the coming year or so?
First of all, thank you, Melissa, for thanking us. Really, I think it's the first time I hear, to be completely honest, a Black woman telling us this, because we've really taken it seriously, because we understand the anti-Blackness that exists in our communities, that we have even ingrained growing up, that we had to unlearn. We really did have to unlearn a lot. And so thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you and being so fierce and being a partner in this work. And I think as far as wins, we've had a lot. And I think that's one thing that we're learning, to celebrate the small wins. So even if they're not huge victories, we want to celebrate the small wins, because this work is hard. And even though sometimes, we win things, the impact of not winning something, it's a lot larger, right? But winning those small things are significant and are moving the needle, if you want to say it that way, towards our liberation, right? And so some of those things that we have won is a big one here in Long Beach has been the Long Beach Justice Fund, right? We are really leading the way in what that fund does and what it means to people. And so this fund is fighting, it's providing free legal representation to immigrant folks facing deportation. Many times people think that if you did something wrong and you ended up in detention, then you should be deported, right? Or you should not be here. And so we're big on no. People make mistakes and people are flawed, right? Going back to people's humanity. And we have to have opportunities to get a second chance, And so that's one big win that we've had here in Long Beach. Also language access, Jamilet has been huge and a big piece of that, right? In that coalition, even though we're not active in this moment, in the previous years, we had to fight so much, so it was a small win as getting interpretation, proper interpretation at city council, right? That was a big win. And now there's money being invested in that program, right? There's not positions in the city that are being paid for through that advocacy. There's been recent times that I've talked to those folks that have been hired, and I just told them, I was I just want to remind you that you're in that role, and I'm grateful that you are in that role, but that was because community fought for that. Community fought for your community really fought for your position, because at the end of the day it was going to benefit, the larger movement. And so those are two local wins that I want to honor and uplift. And then I think at the state level, now we have, health for all for folks that are 50 plus, right? LBIRC has been part of the fight since, in the early years of that coalition. And so we've been winning in fragments, but we are winning, like my mom now is going to benefit from that. And that's huge. Like I see her happy and she's going to be able to go to the dentist and she's going to be able to go to the doctor, right? And get the things that she needed years ago, right? And that she very much deserves. And so that's one big win, And I would say also another big win is changing the narrative in Long Beach about immigrant folks. Like, I don't think we're in the same place we were 4 or 5 years ago, where immigrant voices were completely ignored. I think we've made a mark in the city where now that immigrant voices are not silent. Immigrant voices are not voiceless, right? Immigrant voices are powerful, and we empower one another. And so narrative shift has been something huge that I will say it's been a win of our communities, of our tireless work that we have done. And I'm very, very, very proud of that, of all the impact that has had, because it's for years to come, right? And it's only the beginning of so much more power that is being built in the immigrant community in Long Beach.
For me, I'm smiling so big because I'm thinking of all the different tactics or different strategies that had to be a part of those wins. I know for a fact, one of the most fun one was actually a phone zap that we did for the city for language access. I know when COVID hit, we flooded the city's lines. When we found out that there was no interpretation for online meetings, it was so funny. People were scrambling to try to understand what the community members were saying, and also really sad because it's what the heck? You can't understand what our community members are saying, but just seeing them sweat a little bit, you could just tell trembling a little bit, it was great. So that to me was a big thing. I also think the shift in the culture in organizing in Long Beach is big. There's a lot of things happening in LA. A lot of folks are doing things in LA, but we're seeing Long Beach come. It's been happening. That has been happening. The culture shift has been happening, but I feel just being a part of it and having community members be a part of it and see it grow is beautiful. I think that's a big win. A big win has been the surveillance technology piece that I mentioned earlier. I mean, these conversations were kind of at bay before, and more so even in our communities, they weren't really conversations that were accessible to have because of all the technicalities, all of the behind the closed door information that's kind of going around with what contracts, what vendors, who's third party, all this nonsense, right? But at the end of the day, we know that these technologies aren't safe. And so that narrative shift was I don't need to know all the details. All I know is this isn't good for me. That's all we need, right? So to me, those are really big wins. And the really big one is having built a base from where I started here to where I am now, with the amount of community members that graduate from the Leadership Academy and graduate feeling empowered after having done advocacy and continuing to do mutual aid or advocacy after graduating from the Leadership Academy. That's a big win, because to me is once you see the power of community building, of organizing, of knowing your neighbor, you cannot see that because you see the goodness that comes out of it, right? I don't need to be here to explain it to people. People know that because that's their lived experience and has been, right? It's just reframing, shifting energies, right? And once we do it, we open our heart that direction. We're yeah, this is good. This feels good, right? So big wins.
Yeah. You reminded me of something that I forgot to mention, which is we really got each other. When the community was in big need during the pikes of the pandemic, LBRC really stepped up, right? When no one else did. And I mean really no one. No elected officials, no philanthropy. There wasn't a lot of help for immigrant folks at any level. And LBIRC really stepped up and provided financial, assistance to community members that were turned away simply for not having an immigration status in this country. And those are the folks that were in the front lines, you know, working, delivering the food, like doing all that hard labor that really exposed them in many ways. And no one was there to support them. And LBIRC was like, okay, how do we figure this out? And how do we ask for money to give money back, right? And we really did that. Like, we were able to give almost $2 million during the pandemic to immigrant folks in Long Beach when the city was not doing that, when the county was not doing that, when the state was not doing that. And we wish we would have helped in more ways and in more monetary money, because that's, at the end of the day, when you ask people what they need in this moment right now, and they need money. They need money to pay their rents that are increasing. They need money to pay for their bills, like basic things, and, you know, money for food, like money for basic needs that, you know, it shouldn't be this way. And I'm very proud of that. And that's been a huge win, like to be able to, you know, step up and meet the need of the community when people were in crisis, when we were all in crisis, right?
I'm kind of speechless. Like, hold on. Like, so badass, all the work that you've done, and just being able to, I don't know, I'm happy that you guys can acknowledge that and be happy and celebrate these wins, because oftentimes it's like, oh, okay, we've been working so hard, like it's been really difficult, and we finally got what we wanted, and then we just like brush past it, and then I keep going on to the next thing, because there's always going to be the next thing, right? But celebrating these wins and like talking about them and being really proud of yourself is so important. So congratulations, and like thank you for doing this work. Like, that's amazing. So how can people show up in support of your work and your organization?
There's many ways. And I think one thing that I always say is, like, think about how you want to show up, right? So on the other end, whoever's listening, how do you want to show up? There's many ways, right? If you don't feel like you have the energy to go up to a city council meeting and make public comment, okay, do you have, you know, some money to donate? That will help us continue this work, because I'm going to tell you, you know, our work is really radical, really bold, and philanthropy is not a big fan of that. And so how can you support us and sustain us in this work is you can donate. You can become a monthly, you know, member and donate to our organization. It can be like $5, really, like that adds up. If you get 5 people to do $5, that adds up, right? So you can donate as little, as much as you want. That's one avenue, right? And if you don't have the capacity to be activated and to, you know, be there for calls to action, that's one way. The other one is, you know, join us in actions that we have. As I mentioned, we do a lot of work at the local level, you know, even at the county level, and then at the state level. And there's actions that happen, whether they're virtual, now they're starting to be in person. You can join us. So, you know, I really want to encourage everyone to follow us on social media, because that's where we post everything, right? Where things are coming up. So even though you may not know us personally, you can come to meet us, right? You can come to join us in those spaces and be part of the fight. It could also be like, you know, tuning into, you know, some of the information that we give out on social media, and then passing that on, right? To your tias, to your, you know, to your family members, to your sisters, to whoever is there, like pass that on, right? And then I would say enroll in our programs, and I'll let Jamilet talk about that, because I think it's really important that if you're hearing this and you want to build power, that, you know, you connect with us in other ways. And like Jamilet was saying, like, we get to the root causes and we talk to people about, this is not your fault, right? Like, whatever you may be going through is not your fault. It's systemically meant to work in this way. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, Jamilet, if you want to talk about our programs.
Yeah, so the Leadership Academy, I talk about it all the time. So if you know your mom, your tia has been curious about talking about policing and how it's unsafe for our communities, or want to learn about the prison industrial complex, like these are all in Spanish. And so, you know, bring your grandmas are welcome, for all ages appropriate. I heard this too, like abolition is all ages appropriate. I was like, yes, I love it. This should be an ad. So bring it in. These workshops are meant to be for directly impacted community members, right? So we really do want it to be a conversation between people that are experiencing very similar things in their daily lives, like impacted by the systems that we're talking about, right? I feel like this space has that it has power because it is the people that are directly impacted, talking about the impacts of systems that are harming our communities from their own perspective, and really seeing, hey, yeah, this is harmful. Like, I went through the same thing. So highly, highly encourage people to join. I also really encourage people to get involved with the budget advocacy. We're going to start having some community events, so that's going to be fun. And we're also going to talk about some really serious things going on locally, with the surveillance technology piece really taking in a major role in connecting the dots on how this is a tool for use for further criminalization of our communities, specifically BIPOC communities. I think it's going to be a long fight, but one that will need to harness a lot of power, specifically people power from here in Long Beach.
People power, that's what this is all about. Thank you so much. Thank you to our visionary and bold Gaby Hernandez, Executive Director of the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition, and to the passionate and fierce Jamilet Ochoa, Community Organizer at LBIRC. You can learn more about LBIRC at www.lbirc.org, and they're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at LBIRC562, and we'll include all this information in our text and our captions for our posts. Thanks so much, y'all, for joining RAD AF. That stands for Radical as Beep. Okay, I'll say it. Fuck. Tune in, and you know what? When I asked a friend in LA County how to get involved in Long Beach a couple years ago, he called out LBIRC. You were the first organization that came to mind. So if you're in LA County, check them out. If you're virtual, check them out. They said they could use some funding. You can attend the training, etc. So please spread the word. Thanks, community. Go out there and be radical.
Thanks for tuning in to RAD AF, a podcast by Long Beach Forward. Check us out at longbeachforward.org, bringing you radical thoughts and radical people.